Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for some more Escape From Tarkov weapon builds. In this video, I'll be focusing on some more builds for the mid-game from level 2 and 3 traders for players around levels 20 to 30. I've been really impressed by the variety of weapon builds that I've been able to put together and use this patch because of the loot table changes, which have added a lot of weapons and attachments to the flea market circulation. It's led to some pretty cool options for builds in the mid-game, and new ammo crafting in the hideout makes it easier to use some weapons before you can buy the best ammo for them. The builds in this video aren't budget setups, and they're also not best in slot meta builds. I've tried to use weapons and parts that are good for their price, and also to take advantage of good deals on the flea market wherever possible. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the first build I've got for you, which uses an ADAR as the base to build an M4A1. I've covered a build similar to this one during the last wipe, and it's basically my attempt at making a budget M4 build that comes out with good stats at a solid price point. It's a tricky proposition, considering the M4 itself is generally an expensive gun to buy when compared to other weapons, and it's harder to get the overall recoil down without buying a lot of attachments. I've had a lot of success with this build, and in the 12.6 patch, I've done some fine tuning on it to include some nice upgrades to it from attachments that are now in the loot pools. And because of this, they're pretty cheap on the flea market. You'll need to be at least level 20 to make this build exactly as shown, with mechanic level 2 and peacekeeper level 3. To start the whole build off, you just need to grab a rechargeable battery on the flea market, then trade that to skier level 1 to get an ADAR for only 13 to 14,000 rubles. You're gonna swap out almost every part, but this is a cheap way to get the base parts that you'll need. Next, head to the flea market and look for the lightweight receiver for the TX15. If you just type lightweight into the search bar, it should come up. This item is in the loot pools, and I've seen it on the market for as low as 9,000 rubles, but generally around 12 to 15,000 rubles. That's a pretty good price for an upgraded receiver, and I've been adding these to all my budget and mid-tier M4 setups. After this, go to mechanic level 2 and buy the M4A1 lower receiver for about 19,000 rubles. Combine this with the TX15 upper, drag and drop the barrel and charging handle from the ADAR, and you have the base of a pretty solid M4 build. Once that's all together, I add the Surefire SF3P muzzle device from mechanic level 2, which adds recoil control and gives you the ability to mount a Surefire suppressor if you want to go quiet. For this build, I've been running the Surefire monster suppressor quite a bit because I've been consistently seeing it for a decent price on the flea market of around 25 to 30,000 rubles. You can use the new SOCOM suppressor as well, which is only around 30,000 rubles on the flea market. This one is tan colored though, and it doesn't really fit the look of the build if that matters to you. Whichever one you use, they get to around 11 or 12% total recoil reduction, which is pretty much top tier for 5.56. As a final alternative, you can just run the PWS CQB compensator from skier level 3 or off the flea market to get 10% recoil reduction. This item can be sort of expensive on the market though, so keep that in mind. Moving on to the handguard, I think the MOE SL handguard from skier level 2 is one of the better budget options for the M4. It has a bit of recoil reduction, great ergonomics, and it's cheaper than most other M4 handguards. You'll need M-lock rails from mechanic level 2 to add attachments to this, so I add a 4.1 inch rail and then the Magpul RVG grip from peacekeeper level 3. This adds a pretty balanced upgrade to your stats, and it's one of my favorite grips. For the sight on this one, I just grabbed an EOTech XPS 3-2 hollow sight off the flea market for 20,000 rubles. Most reflex sights seem to be at this price range on the market, so feel free to swap this for your preferred sight. The stock on this build is the trusty MFT BUS stock, sold by Peacekeeper level 3 for about $80. This is the cheapest M4 stock that has best in slot recoil stats, and I use it a lot because of this. To finish this build off, you'll need a pistol grip, and on this one, I just went with the Hogue rubber grip, about $30 from Peacekeeper level 3. The vertical recoil on this build varies depending on your setup. With just the SF3P compensator, it comes out to 65 recoil. With the monster suppressor added, it goes down to 57, and with the PWS CQB compensator, you get 59 recoil. The ergo for this one is around 60 to 65, again depending on whether you add the suppressor. The total cost for this build is around 100 to 110,000 rubles with just the compensator, or around 140,000 with the suppressor added. It's a bit more expensive than a mid-tier AK build, but it's a good price for an M4 that holds up even into the endgame. Next up in this video, I've got two M1A builds for the price of one. The first is a very bare bones setup for players between levels 18 to 30, with the second being an improved mid-tier setup you can put together at level 30 with mechanic level 3. The M1A is among my favorite weapons in Tarkov. It hits hard, it's very accurate, excels at close and long range fighting, and has a ton of mods to choose from when you're building it. One of my favorite things about it though is how effective it is with barely any modding. just a sight to improve your accuracy and land those shots more often. The first build is based on the barter trade at Peacekeeper level 3, which gets you a short M1A in exchange for 8 USB adapters. These are very common items and usually sell for a pretty cheap price on the market as well, letting you get an M1A for between 40 to 60,000 rubles on most days. Next, search the flea market for the CASV 14 rail, which is a pretty common drop in raid and usually sells for only around 9 to 10,000 rubles on the market. This rail gives you a nice ergo boost and lets you mount a sight and a tactical device if you choose. However, because the rails you need for this are locked behind mechanic level 4, you may be stuck using a laser that can mount on the top rail or the XC1 flashlight. The only other addition I make to this build is a sight. You can use whatever you prefer, but I'll just be using an EOTech here as a placeholder. The stats on this build aren't too special, with 146 recoil and around 50 ergonomics, but all you really need to do is hit those 1 or 2 shots you need with the powerful 7.62x51 round, and I find this setup extremely effective in the mid game. Plus, the total cost on this build is only around 80,000 rubles, so it's pretty easy on the wallet for such an effective weapon. However, if you want to add some upgrades to your M1A before you have level 4 traders and the full meta M1A unlocked, once you hit level 30, you unlock a lot of new parts at mechanic level 3. Similar to the M4A1 build in this video, you can build an M1A from scratch just by buying the M1A receiver and a 22-inch M1A barrel, both from mechanic level 3. These two parts will cost you around 58,000 rubles total and will get you the base for a long-barreled M1A build. Next, you can buy the M1A Archangel stock from mechanic level 3 for about 26,000 rubles, and now you have a functioning M1A. Like the last build, I also get the CASV 14 mount off the flea market and then use this to add a sight to the build. You can stick with the red dot sight, but here I want to show the Elcan Spectre DR1-4 scope, which is a pretty solid budget choice for a variable zoom scope. You can usually find one of the 2 versions of this scope on the market for around 30,000 rubles, and it's a good choice if you want to use the M1A in more of a DMR role. For the muzzle device, at level 3 mechanic, you can get the Good Iron M14 muzzle brake, which is pretty cost effective and adds a decent amount of recoil control. If you have Peacekeeper level 4 though, you can also go with the Landtac Dragon muzzle brake for about $120, which is the best in slot part. If you want to run this one suppressed, the cheapest option is the Thunder Beast Ultra 5 suppressor, mounted on the Thunder Beast muzzle brake. Finally, you can also add a flashlight or laser onto the bottom rail of this build if you want, and most lasers or flashlights will fit here. The recoil on this build ranges from 109 down to 97, depending on your choice of muzzle device, and the ergonomics is around 50 to 55, again, depending on if you run the suppressor. For the overall cost, you're looking at around 135,000 rubles for the whole build, or around 155,000 rubles if you run the suppressor, and this is if you can get the parts I mentioned for a good price on the market. All things considered, I think this is a pretty solid M1A build to hold you over until level 40, when you can start building the SAS M1A for endgame PvP. For the next build in this video, I've got an interesting proposition for a budget PvP effective SMG build for the mid game, in the form of a simple MP7 build. I've noticed that the price of MP7s on the flea market has been pretty low during this wipe, and the spawn rate for them in weapon crates seems to be pretty high as well. I've been getting MP7s for 30 to 40,000 rubles on the flea market, and that's a pretty amazing start for a budget MP7 build. Keep in mind this price may fluctuate, but it's been stable for at least a few days while making this video. For this one, I'll be using an MP7A2, but the MP7A1 works pretty much just as well, you just can't add a foregrip to it. Really, the only things you can add to the MP7 are a foregrip, sight, and tactical device, so it's a very simple build to put together. And because the base weapon is fairly cheap right now, the overall cost is quite low. This build is pretty much limited to level 30 with mechanic level 3 unlocked, because before that you can only buy 20 round magazines, which aren't very effective. First up, the foregrip I put on this build is the RK0 foregrip from Skier level 3, which gives you a decent amount of recoil control for a cheap price. The ergo isn't that high, but the MP7 has high base ergonomics anyway. Next up, for the sight, I'm again using an EOTech hollow sight as a placeholder, since most red dot sights are around 20,000 rubles on the market and everyone has their own preference. I also like to add a flashlight and laser combo like the X400 here to SMG builds, because I find the light or laser are both really helpful when pushing corners. Finally, I'll take a second to talk about the mags and ammo for this one. You can get 30 round MP7 mags for a good price at mechanic level 3, which is good enough as long as you control your spray a little bit. The 40 round mags are nice, but they're locked behind level 40 and they're also kind of expensive. For the ammo, the Subsonic SX from mechanic level 3 and the FMJSX from Peacekeeper level 3 are both solid options for mid-tier ammo, before you can buy APSX for endgame PvP. They have very similar stats, but the Subsonic round has much lower muzzle velocity, which can make long distance shots harder. Either way, they're both amazing at punching through low level face shields and class 3 to 4 armor. The stats on this build are 48 recoil and 67 ergonomics, which is pretty good considering very little is added to the base weapon. For the total cost, you're looking at somewhere between 57 to 65,000 rubles at the current flea market price for the MP7. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this went up as more players start to notice such an effective weapon going for a cheap price, so use it while it's cost effective. If you want to add the Rotex 2 suppressor, you can also usually find it on the flea market for around 30 to 40,000 rubles. It might double the price of your build, but you'll be whisper quiet and very hard to detect. Well, that about covers it for these weapon builds. I hope you found the video helpful and you have some good raids if you try out these builds. I've got lots more builds to cover, so videos like these will definitely keep coming. Let me know what you think and post your favorite mid-game weapons down in the comments. I'll be streaming more Escape From Tarkov on Twitch, and if you want to catch a raid sometime, I've got a link to the channel in the description. You'll also find links to my Twitter, Discord server, and Patreon page down there for anyone looking to become a part of the community or maybe even support the channel. Thanks for checking out the video. As always, feel free to leave any comments, corrections, or suggestions down below. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.